lights go dim, it's time to find out what's within. Behind the camera, there's so much more. With AndyGames, let's explore. Behind the camera with AndyGames, meet the streamers, learn their names. Off the screen, who are they? Tune in now, don't delay.
Hello everybody, and welcome to Behind the Camera with AndyGames. This is the podcast where I interview people from the world of content creation and beyond with the sole purpose of getting to know the person a little bit better behind the camera. In this episode, I welcomed Milo Denison. Combined with his background in filmmaking, Milo is the co-host of the 80s and 90s podcast and digital media production manager for Fervorfish, who later this year are holding their own independent podcast award show, the Podysees. Here is the interview. Milo, thank you for taking the time to join me on Behind the Camera with AndyGames. Welcome on. How are you doing today?
Good. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, absolutely. So let's just get straight into it. So let's have a talk first about your background, especially in independent filmmaking, and how that led you to where you are in this present day.
Yeah, it's quite varied. So I initially studied to be an actor, but then I went off into life and got a corporate job and stuff like that. And moving over to Europe, I moved to Ireland in 2013, and now I live in the UK for the past 5 years. And in moving over here, I decided to get back into film and acting and that kind of stuff. And in the process of doing all that, a buddy of mine in Seattle contacted me about, he wanted me to write content for a website he was starting up called the 80s and 90s.com. And I'm like, I just don't have time for it. But do you want to do a podcast? And he's like, well, what the hell's a podcast? And I'm like, well, it's this, right? And so we started doing a podcast called the 80s and 90s Uncensored. And we just realized we were creating so much content. So I was creating like short films and working in films and started doing like promotional videos for people and editing work. And he was doing a lot of content writing and web design and stuff like that. And so we decided to start a company called Fervorfish that kind of rolls all that creative up into it, which is where we get into the podcasting aspect of it. And so I kind of own the podcasting portion of the business. And yeah, that's kind of a real short version of how I got to where I am in life. Basically, did the corporate thing for a long time, kind of got tired of it and wanted to do more creative aspect of life.
I totally feel that. Like I myself am in a corporate job, and this is like my outlet, just digital media. Because obviously we're well embedded into the digital age as it is right now, and you will know this yourself that there is it brings so many like opportunities for, especially with podcasting. Get to sort of talk to people from the other side of the world, for example, at just like the click of a button, which I think is like such an incredible thing. How long have you been in the podcasting side of things, just with your business?
I started my first podcast probably 6 years ago, and that was a different podcast. As an actor, I wanted to talk to other actors and filmmakers and that kind of stuff. And so I started one up, and it was called Diary of an Unemployed Actor. And it was literally just talking to people about how they got into the business and that kind of stuff. And that kind of led to another one, which led to another one, which led to the business of podcasting, which is where I'm at now. And so with Fervorfish, we're kind of all about the independent guys and helping them out. And so part of the business is we'll help people start podcasts up. So a lot of people I think they have this idea, and you've probably experienced this once you talk to people that they're like, oh, you got a podcast. I have an idea for a podcast, or I want to do a podcast. But they don't really do anything beyond that, kind of thing. And it usually falls into a few categories. One is, well, me and my friends are so entertaining when we hang out together. We've got to record that and put it out to the world. And it's like, yeah, you're really not as entertaining as you think you are. And then there's the other aspect of people, if they do start a podcast up, realizing, oh crap, it's a lot of work to do a podcast, and you got to stick with it, and you got to promote it, and you got to plan for it, and do all this other stuff. However, having said that, it does have a low startup cost. You can get into it relatively inexpensive. And so what we do with Fervorfish is we'll help you start it up. So if you do actually legitimately want to start one, we'll help you kind of plan out what it's going to be about. We'll kind of edit the first few and show you how to edit it. So we don't take ownership ongoing. Generally, the rule is we'll help you get your first 10 episodes done, because they find statistically, once you get past that 10th episode, you're more likely to keep doing your podcast. And so that's generally our rules. We help people get going. And then we also have another aspect of the business, which is called Pod Chums, which is really just about helping people promote their podcasts and stuff like that. And that's really where that's at.
Yeah. It's interesting you say as well about once people get to 10 episodes that they're more likely to continue, because it's actually incredible how many people don't even make it to 10 episodes. Like, when you also said about the work that goes into a podcast, and something that I think is kind of slept on in terms of that is consistency. And like with any form of content creation, consistency is such an important thing, particularly in podcasts, because it's given sort of your listeners something to look forward to on a particular day. Like that, it sometimes becomes part of their routine. Like say you have you release your podcast on like a Sunday evening, for example. Monday morning, that could be people's drive to work, etc., etc. There is like a lot that does go into it, and I particularly appreciate your point about it's two guys. It's like we're really entertaining in real life. This is our idea, and the amount of people who have said that to me. And funny enough, my first ever podcast was based around that, but it was in collaboration with a streamer friend of mine, and we just talked, but like we did have good chemistry in terms of back and forward, things like that, but we didn't centralize it around that, because it is important as well to be entertaining, but also have something worthwhile to say, because with this being in the digital age and so accessible, it is kind of getting to the point where more people are just talking but not really saying anything, I find. And that's where good sort of aspects of Fervorfish come in, help you, because it's such a saturated industry podcasting, which is good. It's a good thing, almost, the fact that there's a lot right there. It gives people a voice who may not have felt that they had one before, but there are aspects of it that done right, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing with it is as well, like you said, there's so much out there now, and how are you being different from something else that's already out there? Like, what makes you unique? And there's that balance of your personalities. Like Jamie and I, with our show, we bounce off each other really well. And sometimes, like if one of us is available, we might have like a guest on, so I've had other co-hosts come on a couple times instead of him, and you don't have that same dynamic.
Yeah.
But we always have our show theme. And sometimes when people think that they're so into their dynamic, let's say they got like an hour-long show, and your first 20 minutes are them chatting about what they did over the weekend, and it's kind of like, just come on, guys, skip ahead.
Yeah.
So it's finding that right balance of having a good dynamic that people want to tune in, because they're listening to you, they're hearing your voice, and they want to hear your personality come through, but they also need something a bit more than that too, whether it be a history show or like your show where they're turning into like learn about these different subjects. It varies.
Yeah, absolutely, because I think that personality can shine through in any podcast, and that's great, but that's only kind of half of the job, because as you say, if it is just the first 20 minutes of two people talking about what they did, that might be very engaging between the two people talking, but if you have a listener, excuse me, if you have a listener who is listening from another part of the world who doesn't really know people on that kind of level, they have really nothing to relate to. They might kind of not find it as funny as it's supposed to come off. And at the end of the day, it's like you're putting a podcast out, it has to be centralized around something. Sometimes there are podcasts where it is just having a conversation. It does need to be a theme for a wider audience, like outside of friends and family, as it were.
Yeah, yeah. I think so. And if you want to do a friends and family podcast, great, but I guess probably don't complain too much that not too many people are listening to it.
Absolutely. But as well with Fervorfish, it does expand beyond podcast, and obviously you do podcast inside of it, but I happen to see on your website that you have a number of business testimonials. So you guys cover web design and advertising through that as well, would I be right in saying?
Yeah, so we do web design and promotional content. So, like, let's say, for example, a recent client, they were they do these like those electric chairs that go up steps, for like older people.
Yeah.
And so they can't walk the stairs, so they need to sit in the chair. And so they just had a really outdated website. And so we did a new updated website for them that just, it looks good, but it also, we can do like promotional videos. So we didn't do this with them, but we could, if they wanted us to, is do some videos, promotional videos as well. So, showing potentially some videos doing the installation, like really short, 60, 30 second, up to 2 minutes. We did one for an arts center, and we went in and did like some nice talking to the camera interviews with some of the artists there, and then they had a music night, and so we took some of the music from the music night and threw that over the video to kind of help promote the kind of stuff they do. So it's a little bit of mix. And then one thing with search and getting seen, of course, is Google's algorithm loves fresh content and written content, and so we can help them out with that as well and get them help writing their content. We do some content, but that's Jamie's side of the business, not mine. But he'll also help do blog content and stuff like that for them as well. But it's more about the web design and the promotional videos and that kind of stuff.
And in terms of the promotional videos, is that something that you handle yourself, or yeah? So
yeah.
Based around
So I'll
that,
be in
then,
charge of it. I might bring, sorry to interrupt you
of
there.
course
I mean,
not, of
I'll
course.
bring people in, like, if I need another camera operator or like, different people to work on different stuff, I've got a network that I'll reach out to.
Oh, brilliant. So based around that, then, given your background as an independent filmmaker, going into filming these types of videos, promotional videos for businesses, how do you sort of like, do you incorporate like certain skills that you had back then into these videos, or do you find it to be like a completely different way of directing?
A little bit. Like, so if you're doing a film, then you're dealing usually with actors, a script, that kind of stuff. And so you're dealing with people that know essentially what they're doing or what they're supposed to be doing. Whereas something like this, I did one for these girls. They do a soap making, and they're not used to being in front of the camera. So I essentially sat them down and had them do a few talking to the camera stuff. But mostly what I did is I filmed them making the soaps and packaging them and that kind of stuff, and then overlaid the talking with it so that way they're not feeling too uncomfortable being on camera. And so I would have like, say, some questions that I'd ask and throw that into the overlay. So it is a different skill set that you need to get what you want out of it. But at the end, it's telling a story. So with film, of course, you're usually telling a fictional story, whereas with a promotional video, you are telling something that's non-fictional. And of course, it's going to be much shorter. and really to the point. So
how do you find
you
then
can make
shift?
it.
Sorry, go on. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
All
Go
right.
on.
No, but I mean, you can make a film. Like there's film festivals that do 1 minute films, right? I did one a few years ago that it was 15-second films. So you had to come up with
15?
an entire story in under 15 seconds and film it. And so, yeah, it's about just making sure that you've got the story in there. And for people listening or watching that are thinking about this kind of stuff, what's great about it is the technology we have now allows people to do that. So maybe you can't afford to hire somebody, but you've got a business that you want to promote. You can do a lot of this stuff yourself now with your phones, or you can get a camera. Like right now, we're recording this through Discord. We've each got headsets on, we've got our microphones. And I think from looking at it, we've got pretty decent microphones, but you can get it cheap,
Oh yeah.
40, something for under $40, 40 pounds or whatever for a microphone and cheap cameras. And cameras nowadays are great.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So
Yeah, like that's the one of the better things about it these days. The fact that everything is so accessible and it's not much of an investment to begin with. And the worst case, if it doesn't work out, you have a decent microphone and a decent webcam that
yeah.
you can use for any other purpose. Excuse me. So, how do you find then? So obviously, probably kind of answered this in a sense, but going from making short films to making promotional content, which is short form content in essence, how did you find that kind of shift in sort of being able to go from telling a story over the course of anywhere 5 to 15 minutes in a short film to 60-second ad?
You really need to be willing to cut stuff out, throw it into an ad. You need to do it with a film as well. I think a lot of films nowadays are way too long anyway, because people don't want to cut enough out. But that's the key, is really cut stuff out. And even though you might think something's brilliant, and it might be, you're going to have to cut it out. It's the whole cut your darlings aspect that writers have to deal with and filmmakers and stuff. And it's the same with film or with short ads, is cut it out. And you can do multiple. So often what I'll do is I might do like a 30 or 60-second promo, but then there's a lot more content that you want. Also do a 2-minute version, right? That you can then throw on your website. So do the 60-second version for your social media and do a 2-minute version that you put on your website that gets a lot more of that content in there that you want.
Yeah, that's obviously such a beneficial thing, because it tells more of the story that you want to in promoting this business, and it kind of sort of reduces then the creative compromise that I think is such a struggle with filmmakers and directors as a whole, which is that's very, very interesting. So let's talk about then your podcast, 80s and 90s podcast. Podcast centralized around 80s and 90s pop culture. What more can you tell us about that? Like,
yeah, we've released an episode once a week for the past 4 years now. So we've been really consistent about it. We offer, I don't know if you remember back in the day, Domino's had that 30 minutes or less guarantee.
Yep.
That's our show.
I'm old enough for that.
Exactly. Okay, well, there you go. Hence the 80s and 90s is our show.
Yeah.
But every episode's under 30 minutes. And like you said, it gives something people to listen to on a Monday morning. We release new episodes every Monday. So if your job sucks, you hate life, the fact that you're driving into work, at least you've got the 80s and 90s uncensored, 30 minutes or less, gets you there, and you can have some fun with it. And it's just because we're both children of the 80s. And so we remember those days. And they're fun subjects to talk about. It's not necessarily that we think everything from the 80s is the best, or the 90s, which was 90s was kind of my era. But it's a fun thing to talk about. We know about it. And I think right now, retro is in.
Big time.
And there's a lot of that kind of stuff out there. And people that remember it like to listen to it and be like, "Oh yeah, I remember that," or "Oh, the Noid from Domino's," or and we'll have serious subjects like we might talk about Chernobyl or different things like that. We talked about the AIDS crisis. But we'll also have stupid stuff like who would win in a cage match between Skeletor or Mumra from cartoons. So it balances back and forth between the
Yeah.
two.
That's brilliant. I love the
Yeah,
fact that as well, like it gives nostalgia to people from that area, but also like it gives a sort of good insight for people from this current generation who were around in the 80s, remember the 90s, for example, a good insight as to what it was like. And just because every decade, like you look back at it now being in 2025, every single decade was just, even though it doesn't seem that far away, it was something so different about it. Like, so I grew up in the 90s, remember too much of it, but I remember the 2000s, obviously the millennium being sort of technological advancement, 2010s being now it's just, all of a sudden we're so deeply rooted like technology in a way that we weren't 10 years. It's sort of nice to have that little throwback to look back and think that, yeah, it's interesting what was going on at the time. And like, as you say, retro is 100%. My own personal background, I'm a gamer, and retro is just the thing. Everybody is playing Mario, everybody's playing Sonic again. It's like, it's nice to see people kind of reliving that, but in a way, I guess you could say people of my age are going into like an early crisis and just reliving their youth.
Yeah, it happens to everybody. I think there's a certain level of just nostalgia of we think to certain years of our life, and you're like, oh man, that was the best time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was, and there's a lot of great things about it, but sometimes you got to remember, well, maybe it wasn't that great as well. And there are a lot of nice things about modern life that because I get a bit annoyed at everybody's on their phones, that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and some of the other things. But the reality is, it also makes life so much easier. You're sitting around 20, 30 years ago debating like who said something or who wrote something. Now you just grab your phone and be like, hey, who said this? And the phone answers, so and so said it.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I think being in like in the podcast world, that alone, you find yourself on your phone a lot, checking for emails and outsourcing for all your content and things like that. Just trying to keep the consistency, keep the ball rolling and everything like that. But there is like a line where it does become just pure compulsion. Like you say, like, something that used to be debated, like who shot first, Hannah or Greedo? That old age-old debate, you know what I mean?
Since they ruined the movies.
Yeah, exactly, you could get an answer to that in like 2 seconds now. That just sort of takes away all the magic of that. So there is like obviously a fine line. Like, I mean, because as you say, like the accessibility of everything it's brilliant in a way, but there has to be a line, surely.
Yeah. We'll see. We had a guy on recently and we were talking about movies. And of course, Jamie and I were ripping on Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, because, that's what you got to do if you're down for the original trilogy. And the dude on there, he was like, I like it. It was the first Star Wars movie, because he's much younger. It was the first Star Wars movie I ever saw. So I guess there's that to get you into Star Wars. But
oh, for sure. Like in a way, you could argue that that's like quite a good thing, because if that's the first Star Wars that somebody's ever seen, the bar has been set so low. Imagine what it's going to be like when they see the prequel trilogy from the 70s and 80s. If anything, it's like, yeah. Okay, maybe this isn't all that bad.
Yeah, you're like, okay, that was watchable, and then you watch it and you're like, oh, they actually get good. Wow.
But it does go to show though that like those little things, those little tidbits from people's earlier lives, like it does hold like that little sort of special bit of nostalgia. Like obviously with Star Wars being one of the franchises in the world, like globally known household name. Obviously it's unfortunate that happened to be the case, that was the first episode, the first film that they saw, but at the same time, then they kind of held on to that, and that was like, what was the first, like special to them in that way, which is like quite an amazing thing. And then get to sort of bring them back to the 70s and 80s whenever it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When it was all right.
Absolutely. So now we mentioned before that podcasting aspect of Fervorfish, that you have a specific focus on indie podcasts and that side of things. And with that, you guys have the Podysees upcoming.
Yep.
The podcast awards for independent podcasts, which I think is incredible. What can you tell us about this, about say inception and the format and everything go?
Yeah. So it's called the Podysees. That's Jamie's the one that named that, by the way. I just wanted to call it the Independent Podcast Awards because I thought the IPAs was cool.
Yeah, I like it. Catchy.
It is catchy, but there's actually already is an Independent Podcast Awards. But the catch with theirs is it's a British awards event. So you have to be a British podcaster in order to enter it. And that's part of the problem. So essentially, I was looking for podcasts contests to enter the 80s and 90s uncensored into. And it came down to kind of two areas, right? So let's say you've got the Ambies, very popular, pretty much everybody knows about them. But if you want to enter one, it starts at, say, $150 for members, going up to $250. So they're expensive.
Yep.
And so if you're an independent podcaster, you don't have money to be spending to enter the Ambies, where you're then also competing against these heavily funded celebrity podcasts, so you're not going to win. But then you go to the flip side, where a lot of these smaller independent stuff, so the Independent Podcast Awards are only £30 to enter in the UK, affordable, but you have to be British. And it's the same thing. So either Canadian or whatever criteria, or expensive. And so we wanted to do a low-cost podcast awards festival that anyone can enter. Of course, I say anyone, but the reality is it has to be an English-speaking podcast because our judges, we don't have, every language. And of course, if you're a big budgeted podcast, you can't enter. So screw you guys anyways. But we wanted to make it affordable, so it's only $25 to enter. And that's literally it. It's to celebrate the little guys. You don't get a lot other than recognition. You get a plaque, a plaque that you send if you win. You get little laurels that you can put on your website to say that, I won a Podyssey. We give people a free year to Podchums, which is that kind of little group that I mentioned. Yeah. So you get a couple little perks just for entering. You get the membership for the year. But if you win, you get the laurels and the plaque. And it really, literally just came down to, we just wanted to recognize independent podcasters, which is funny because the whole idea came from me wanting to enter a podcast awards festival that now I can't enter because we sponsor it. So entries open Friday from when we're recording this, which is going to be a couple days from now. So whenever this goes out, so it's the 7th of March. They close July 11th, so people can enter anytime before that through our website, fervorfish.com/Podysees, or you can go to a custom URL, which is just thepodysees.com, whichever, Podyssees, by the way. And, get a little recognition. We're going to do a virtual awards event. Each category is going to have finalists and the winner, so everybody gets called out. Anybody who enters gets recognized on the website, so everybody's podcast is going to get listed who enters. It'll link back to their podcast and talk about them a little bit. So again, it's just about getting people recognized for doing small podcasts because, as you know, it's so hard to get people to listen to your show to know about it, right?
100%.
Because you don't have the money to be spending a ton of money on advertising. And so how do you get people to hear about your show? And so that's one of the ways that we wanted to do that. So that way, when we're throwing it on social media, on the website, it'll be linked, we'll have the video from the awards event. And just, we just wanted to give some credit to independent podcasters because that's who we are. And we got to support our own in a way.
Yeah, that is absolutely fantastic. I 100% back everything you said there because I think it's important to recognize independent podcasts, especially because it's, as you say, it's low budget, people who are doing something out of passion or just because they want to do it and they have the access to that. But of course, they find themselves like people within their first few months or something are not going too well. People get so easily disheartened because how do I get this out here? How do I do this? Oh, I'm competing with the likes of Joe Rogan and all this. It's like, just keep doing what you're doing. Just it is a slow process, as you know. Like the fact that you guys have come up with this or yourself have come up with that is it's incredible and absolutely commendable. And anybody who is listening to this, if you have a podcast, definitely check out the Podysees and enter if you have a podcast and get yourself out there.
Yeah, I have a discount code for anyone listening that has a podcast as well. So it's POD25, POD25, and that'll get you $10 off the entry fee. So instead of paying $25 to enter, it'll be $15 to enter. And that's good through the deadline for listeners of this show.
Brilliant. And is there any other specific criteria to this, or is it mainly just English speaking podcasts? Really, would that be the main?
Yeah, that's the main thing. I mean, sorry we have to do English speaking, but our judges were all native English speakers. We have one judge that speaks German, but we don't want to make that. It would just be too difficult to do different languages. Shows must have been released within the past 12 months, so it does have to be. We don't want you to submit a podcast from something that you made like 3 years ago, right? Yeah. You need to be a podcaster currently podcasting is kind of what I'm saying. Let's see, what were some of the other nominate things? It has to be publicly available, no exclusives to a platform kind of thing, or you need a password to access it, that kind of stuff. And I think that's basically it. And independent. And to be honest, we'll take money from mainstream podcasters. So Conan O'Brien, if you want to submit your podcast, go for it. But I can tell you right now, you will not win. We'll take the money, but you will be in the loser pile. I love your show, by the way, Conan. I'm sure you're listening to this right now, watching, and huge fan. If you want to have me on Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, I will be your friend. But if you send it to our show, you will not win.
Here's looking at you, Conan O'Brien. That's incredible. Yeah. I absolutely love that, and that's something I'm definitely going to share out to a lot of my podcaster friends. I definitely think things like that are slept on. Like scroll through like Twitter or any social media, you kind of see a lot of people are really trying to plug their podcast, really trying to. And there's only so far that goes, especially like with people podcasters who have like, distinct communities and all. They have almost like a guaranteed viewership, but like I said, that only goes so far. You have to really sell yourself, and the fact that you have given people a platform like that is absolutely. I am very excited to see how this goes. Is this your inaugural year, or have you been going for?
No, this is the first year doing it, so it would be a good year to enter because you're more likely to win because of the number of submissions. Might not have as many and hopefully it'll catch on year over year. We'll get more submissions, which will be great. But then, of course, the competition is harder. So if you are listening and you have a podcast, you will be pretty likely to win this year. You get a plaque.
You've heard it here from the source, and if that is not reason to enter, I do not know what is.
Exactly.
Milo, thank you so much for your time today. It has been absolutely incredible getting to chat to you behind the camera with Andy. It's been incredible learning about your background, about your business, what you guys, and of course your own podcast, the 80s and 90s podcast. Definitely check that out on all platforms, and of course the Podysees, as we have just covered. If you have a podcast yourself, definitely check it out. Definitely get yourself entered. Get your name out there. It's an incredible incentive. Yeah, like I pretty much covered that and how
Yep.
that is. So definitely, I 100% myself. Yes, Milo, thank you so much for your incredible.
That's it. Well, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate the enthusiastic plug there at the end as well. That's very kind of you. And yeah, again, appreciate being on the show. And
Of course, no problem.
I know I just ended that sentence with "and" like I was going to say something else, but then I was like, what else am I going to say? No, I just appreciate being on the show.
And there you have it. That was my conversation with Milo Denison. What an incredible insight into Fervorfish, what they do as a digital media agency, the people they help and everything. Honestly, a huge fan of their work. And who could forget the Podysees? What an incredible concept. An award show for independent podcasts, giving them the voice and the recognition that they absolutely deserve. So definitely be sure to check that out. And if you have your own podcast, be sure to look into that and see if you want to nominate your own podcast for this. Thank you to everybody for tuning in to today's Behind the Camera with AndyGames. I am AndyGames. My guest today was Milo Denison. We will be back again soon with another installment of Behind the Camera. But until then, peace.